And welcome back to American Agenda. I'm Heather Childers along with Joe Pinion, who is in for Bob Sellers. Texas Democrats who fled their state on a luxury jet with a case of beer. They are staying in a $200 per night hotel in D.C. as the Texas House voted to send law enforcement after them to haul them back to Texas. Vice President Kamala Harris commending the Democrats, though, as she met with them. Listen.
You all know I've been traveling, and as most recently as yesterday when I was in Detroit and heard of your courageous stand, I talked about exactly what I believe about the courage and the commitment and the patriotism that you all have evidenced by your actions in addition to your work and your words.
Courage, commitment, and patriotism. Well, there are a lot of questions, though, about whether or not people agree with what she said and how the fugitive politicians are paying for this escapade. And when do they plan to return to Texas? We heard they're going to stay for 30 days out of the state. Let's bring in our panel once again for their comments on this. Jesse, Jane, I'll start with you. Do you think that they should be arrested? I know that the Senate was able to pass the voter integrity bill there because 22 Texas state Democrat senators stayed behind. So they were able to do their business, but the House still cannot.
Well, I don't know what the Texas laws are and what type of jurisdiction they would have if they fled the state, but to call this courage and patriotism by the Vice President of the United States tells me she has no concept of what it takes to have courage or patriotism in this country. They fled. They couldn't stand their ground on the positions that they have. They were elected to fight the battles for the people that they represent. If they disagree with this, then they should stay. They're like men and women and stand on their own 2 feet and do that. The case of beer was just the absolute perfect metaphor of what this really is. It's what we call a boondoggle. And I doubt very highly that they can all afford $200 a night, which is actually cheap for D.C. So I'm not quite sure if they're on New York Ave at one of those little side motels, but $200 a night for 30 days. This is disgusting. It shows the weakness of the Democrats, and she is praising them, just like when she bailed out the criminals in Minneapolis. She now is calling this courage and patriotism. Wow, we've come a long way from what that really means.
Absolutely. Ash, I'll come to you because you're no stranger to Texas politics. You know, how is this going to play out locally? It seems as if it's chaos in Texas politics from the outside looking in. You got a three-way primary for governor down there, primaries for the attorney general race on the Republican side. Potentially you have somebody in Matthew McConaughey talking about running for governor of Texas down there. And against the backdrop of all of this, the legislature is paralyzed because Democrats have fled to D.C.
Right. Well, this actually isn't the first time this happens. It happened in 2013 when they actually did the exact same arrest warrant. They fled not too long ago and then are redoing it. I mean, look, I remember a time when we would say these colors don't run, and now apparently they do, at least for the Democrat side. It's just amazing to me that this is being called courage. But what the real problem here, and what I think ultimately they need to come back, is they are costing our state $43,000 a day that they're gone. That's money to pay for staffers that can't work, to keep everything that's going on in the Texas legislative session is costing $43,000 a day in taxpayer money. And ultimately, I hope that they're held responsible, although I know that they won't be. But it's shameful. They need to come back and do their business. If they want to actually make a change, then they need to get elected and be with policies that the people want to vote for. But just saying, hey, look, I'm in a minority and I don't want to be a part of this, and I don't want to actually support a bill or a vote that actually allows people to vote more, which, by the way, they're actually wrong on that. And I think what's most hypocrisy on this is if you look at Texas voting with our 14-day early voting process, almost 12 hours on voting on a single day. We're trying to pass where if you're already in line at 7 p.m., you can stay in line. While if you look at Joe Biden's state, his home state, they don't even have early voting at all. So maybe they should go to the White House and look at him and say, hey, why are you the one that's suppressing voters? And why don't you go back to your home state and work on this versus fleeing from our home state to go spend a bunch of money that nobody has in any government, to hang out in Washington, D.C. and take selfies?
You know, Derrick, when I mentioned this earlier, I couldn't remember specifically some of the things that the Democrats there in the state of Texas were able to get into their voting bill. The option for voters to cure or fix issues with their absentee ballots, and also another provision that was sought by Democrats against a person being convicted of a crime for voting a provisional ballot while unknowingly being ineligible. So they were able to get things in. There were some other things as well, but then they flee the state and they don't want to come back and do the job or meet a quorum to try to block everything.
You know, it frustrates me because it's all a publicity stunt. The selfies, the beer, and all that kind of stuff. Stick around, do your job, people. And that's the thing that frustrates me more. And the other thing that frustrates me with this is I am so sick and tired of Dems, liberals, screaming that they got to help us with our own voting rights. You know what? We can speak for ourselves. We don't need you to tell us what's necessary for us to get out and vote. So you need to get back to Texas and do your job. If the legislation is so strong, if it's that strong, and you're that proud of what you have to present, then get back and fight and do your job there, not in Washington D.C. Because as what's her name just said, you cannot afford a $200 hotel. You can't get a decent hotel in D.C. for $200 unless you're up on New York Avenue on one of those little rinky-dink shady hotels. So who's really paying for this? And what's it costing Texas right now?
Yeah, and for 30 days, they said they were going to stay there. I was shocked by that.
The whole time, the whole special session, they're gonna hang out there. I mean, it's really crazy. I gotta have our panel stand by.